Hold up, wait just a minute. Before you click the dislike button and turn off this video, let me explain. I love superhero films. Ever since I was a kid, I would rewatch my DVD copy of Sam Raimi's original Spider-Man film starring Tobey Maguire and Willem Dafoe dozens of times. I grew up with shows like Batman the Animated Series, Justice League, and Batman Beyond. I have always been a fan of superhero content. I have early memories of borrowing my cousin's VHS copy of Batman Forever with Jim Carrey as the Riddler and absolutely loving it. And despite the title of this video, I do really like the first Avengers movie. Despite it often looking like a TV movie with extremely non-cinematic and flat lighting, seriously, why does a big budget blockbuster look like this? It's so ugly. I'm getting off track. I still find the first Avengers movie from 2012 to be a really well-paced, fun, and action-packed film, and the point of this video is not to criticize the Avengers or Marvel as a whole. There's plenty of videos on this platform already covering that. No, instead I want to break down the lasting impact that the Avengers had on Hollywood and blockbuster filmmaking. For better or worse, the Avengers sort of broke Hollywood, and it'll never be the same. I'm the former film student, and I invite you on this journey as we discuss how the Avengers ruined blockbusters. Superhero movies have come and gone in waves over the years. The obvious place to start when it comes to this subgenre is the original Richard Donner Superman film from 1978. It starred Christopher Reeve as the Boy in Blue and even managed to get one of the best actors of all time in Marlon Brando to play Superman's Kryptonian father, Jor-El. With an amazing score from John Williams that gets my blood pumping even to this day, the film was very successful for the time, bringing in over $300 million at the box office on a $55 million budget. This paved the way for a sequel, and around 11 years later, after the success of the Superman films, we finally got ourselves a film focused on the Caped Crusader Batman. Directed by Tim Burton and starring Michael Keaton as the Dark Knight, we got a very different kind of superhero film as opposed to Donner's Superman. Batman '89 was dark, moody, and atmospheric, held up by a great Jack Nicholson performance as the Joker, Michael Keaton being a surprisingly good Batman, and the excellent production design and style that Burton would become known for that gave us a dark and gothic look at Gotham City. The movie was massively successful. Unfortunately for both the Superman and Batman franchises, the later sequels in both franchises would cause studios to lose faith in superhero films. Both franchises leaned too heavily into goofy and campiness that just didn't resonate with people in the way the more honest and serious tone of the earlier entries did. In all fairness, it's pretty hard to go from Danny DeVito's Penguin biting a guy's nose off to Arnold Schwarzenegger making ice puns for the entirety of Batman and Robin.
All right, everyone, chill.
The bat nipples definitely didn't help either. That being said, superhero films were kind of mute for a while. We did get a solid Blade movie that has a significant fan base, however it was Bryan Singer's X-Men that really brought superheroes back to the mainstream. Looking back now, it's easy to poke fun at how serious and dry the first X-Men film was. The film often looks and feels more like a political drama than it does a comic book movie, but in the context of when it was released, after the myriad of goofy superhero films, a more serious adult take on the genre was exactly what the superhero genre needed. Bryan Singer's X-Men film also paved the way for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man film released in 2002 to become a massive hit. Now this is just my personal opinion, but considering everything that came before it and after, Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man film, when released, had finally found the perfect blend between campy superhero content and grounded, more serious storytelling. Sure, there was some really goofy stuff that, again, looking back, may not age too well. However, it has enough serious iconic moments like the death of Uncle Ben, or the excellent and brutal final fight between Dafoe's Green Goblin and Maguire's Spider-Man. The film was lightning in a bottle and showcased what you could really do when you hand the reins to an iconic character like Spider-Man to a young and hungry filmmaker with a creative and distinct visual style like Sam Raimi. As anyone who's familiar with Raimi's pre-Spider-Man work can attest that he definitely brought over a lot of similar elements from his Evil Dead trilogy to the Spider-Man movies. A mere 3 years after the first Raimi Spider-Man film, and we get to see another auteur filmmaker take on a superhero property. I'm of course referring to Christopher Nolan's take on the Caped Crusader with his 2005 film Batman Begins, starring Christian Bale as Batman, Michael Caine as Alfred, and Cillian Murphy as Scarecrow. Now for reference, the last time we saw Batman, he looked and acted like this.
Chicks dig the car.
This is why Superman works alone.
So when we got this,
I'm Batman.
it was pretty fucking awesome. Nolan's take on the character was intended to deliver us a more grounded and realistic take on the character, to the point where a lot of people don't really view his trilogy of Batman films as true comic book movies. Instead, they see them more as crime dramas that just happen to feature a guy dressed as a bat who fights criminals. 3 years after the release of Batman Begins, we got the sequel, a film that is still regarded as one of the best films in the genre, some claiming it to be the pinnacle of comic book filmmaking, The Dark Knight, a riveting action film that improved on its predecessor in nearly every way, except the Batman voice. It definitely sounds the best in Batman Begins, but everything else was better. Better fight scenes, better action, better music, better villains, and a better story. Heath Ledger's transformative performance as the Joker is still one of the best performances in any blockbuster, period. Every scene he's in is so magnetic, and there's very few performances where the actor completely disappears into the character. However, there was another film that was released in 2008, another superhero film, one that's success would lead audiences, studios, and comic book films down a road with no turning back. That film is, of course, Iron Man, starring Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, and Jeff Bridges as Ironmonger. Helmed by Elf and Swingers director Jon Favreau, who also stars in the film would become a massive success, garnering great critical reviews and doing well at the box office. It was only natural the studio would want a sequel. Iron Man 2 was expected. What wasn't expected was that another film would be released in 2008, another superhero film. The Incredible Hulk starring Ed Norton and Liv Tyler would be released, and in the final scene of the movie, Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark would appear, mentioning that a team is forming, and there it was. See, at the end of the first Iron Man, Tony is approached by Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson, and although that was our first inkling of what would come, the first real seed of a connected universe was planted at the end of The Incredible Hulk, a superhero from a different film appearing and mentioning the formation of a team. That was it. 4 years later, and we arrive at the film in question, 2012's The Avengers. Since the time of the original Iron Man's release, we had received The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, and a solo Captain America film. It had been made clear that after The Incredible Hulk, that an Avengers film was the ultimate plan. This isn't the first time crossovers had happened in cinema. Even dating back to the 30s and 40s, characters from the Universal monster movies like Frankenstein and Invisible Man would often appear in each other's films. However, in terms of blockbuster superhero films, this had never been done. We never saw Spider-Man show up in the X-Men movies, Keaton's Batman never met Reeves' Superman. The hype and anticipation leading into the Avengers was massive. I distinctly remember in 2012 being in 8th grade and everyone in school was talking about it, students and teachers alike. Would it work? Would they be able to successfully bring all these different heroes together? I mean, in retrospect, after films like Infinity War and Endgame, it's easy to think juggling 6 or 7 characters would be a cakewalk. But at the time, this was only 5 years after Spider-Man 3 had killed the Raimi-verse and caused it to get rebooted. A big issue in that film, and one that many complained about, was that there was too many villains, another problem that would show up in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So how would the Avengers fare? Well, the film would go on to make over $1.5 billion, the culmination of 5 separate films over a 4-year time span, and the idea of bringing these heroes together resulted in massive financial success. The film, as mentioned, did amazing at the box office, but also, more importantly, the film garnered stellar reviews from critics and audiences, praising its efficient storytelling and its ability to have multiple characters and never feel jumbled or overbearing. When Marvel's The Avengers released and smashed open the box office, every movie studio took notice. The days of endless sequels to one sole property and one character were in the past. It was clear to every major film studio that the way to make the big money, to really get people to buy tickets and to ensure massive profits regardless of the quality of the film, was simple: build a connected shared universe. It didn't matter if you had 1 or 2 bad films that weren't critically revered or made a ton of money. It's not like Phase 1 of Marvel is full of extremely well-received movies, but it was the end goal in sight that kept people watching. You didn't want to see the Avengers if you hadn't seen Thor or Captain America. You wanted to know who all of these characters were, so you were obliged to watch all of them. This trend continued into phases 2 and 3 and even 4, but it all started with the build-up to the first Avengers film. If the Avengers was poorly received or critically panned or didn't do as well at the box office as it did, who knows where Marvel would be. But the Avengers showed that an ensemble film filled with characters from separate solo films could be massively profitable. A lot of the Phase 1 films weren't anything crazy in terms of box office success, several of them not even cracking $500 million. However, the assembling of all of these heroes into one film and it being the first time we had seen a connected universe coming together in one movie created an event. You had to see the Avengers if you wanted to be a part of the cultural phenomenon. It was brilliant marketing and a genius plan on the part of Marvel and Kevin Feige. It was a massive gamble but paid off and set up the Marvel Universe for another decade of success. Although Marvel has lost a lot of favor in the eyes of many of its fans, the buildup and connectivity starting from Iron Man 1 back in 2008 to Avengers Endgame in 2019 was nothing short of magical. Even people who aren't a fan of the films can at least acknowledge creating a sense of obligation to watch each and every film with the idea that you had to in order to understand the next big crossover was a brilliant business strategy. Unfortunately, here's where we get to the real point of the video and where the title comes into play. As mentioned, when the Avengers took the world by storm, making $1.5 billion, every studio had the same idea. How can we copy that? And why wouldn't they? If the goal of a film studio is to turn a profit, why not try to engineer their own cinematic shared universe to compete with Marvel? The obvious first one to attempt this was Warner Bros. With their DCEU. Unlike Marvel, DC even sort of had a slight advantage. See, if you're unaware, Iron Man and Thor may be popular now because of the success of the MCU, however the most popular Marvel characters were usually the X-Men, Spider-Man, and the Fantastic Four. But back in the 90s, Marvel Studios went broke and sold the rights for Spider-Man to Sony and sold the rights to the X-Men and Fantastic Four to Fox Studios, whereas DC still had the rights to all their characters. Now, one can make the argument that DC attempted to start their universe with 2011's Green Lantern starring Ryan Reynolds. However, the first real attempt at building a cinematic universe was 1 year after the Avengers, with 2013's Man of Steel directed by Watchmen and 300 director Zack Snyder, and starring Henry Cavill as Superman along with Amy Adams as Lois Lane and Michael Shannon as General Zod. The film received mixed reactions at best, being critically divided yet still doing pretty well at the box office. Unlike Marvel, there was no real link to any other DC characters other than seeing a Wayne Enterprise logo on one of the buildings in Metropolis. However, despite no other DC characters appearing or any strong connection, it was obvious DC was gearing up for their own crack at a cinematic universe. It was not long before the next film and the entire slate of the DCEU was announced, and in 2016 we received Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, helmed again by Snyder and the first appearance of our new iteration of Batman played by Ben Affleck. The film also introduced us to Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, Ezra Miller's Flash, Ray Fisher's Cyborg, and Jason Momoa's Aquaman. Oh yeah, and Doomsday shows up at the end of the movie too. Needless to say, it was clear right from this film that Warner Brothers had no intention of building up a cinematic universe over time. Instead, it was evident that the studio just wanted to jump to the big crossover storytelling as fast as they could. As before we even had received a solo film for Aquaman, Flash, Batman, or Cyborg, we already were set to receive our first massive crossover between all the characters in 2017's Justice League. Originally helmed by Snyder again, yet during the production, due to a personal tragedy, Snyder stepped down from the project and was relieved by Joss Whedon, who directed the first two Avengers movies. So if it wasn't already obvious DC was trying to play catch-up to Marvel, hiring the director who was responsible for heading the massively successful Avengers films made it pretty clear. Oh, I already forgot to mention, but in 2016 we also got a Suicide Squad movie which served to operate as a sort of Guardians of the Galaxy clone, where you take an ensemble of misfit characters and team them up. The biggest difference is there's only 5 Guardians, one of which says only 3 words, whereas there's multiple Suicide Squad members. Also, the Guardians aren't exactly villains, whereas in the Suicide Squad when we meet Harley Quinn for the first time, we're told she was an accomplice in the murder of Robin, who was a child. Kinda hard to root for that character at that point. I digress. Just another case of them trying to rush to make something. Imagine if the first Suicide Squad film had been a collection of different villains that were captured and put into Arkham over several films, but that would require time and effort and work. Either way, I'm spending a lot of time discussing the DCEU, which I already have a full video essay on the failure of the DCEU on my channel, so you can check that out if you want, link in the description. Long story short, Justice League was a Frankenstein monster of a movie using footage from the original Snyder version and the new footage that Whedon had shot. It was critically reviled and did not do well at the box office. They attempted to continue the universe, but after several more failed attempts at making films in this universe, the DCEU has officially ended with 2023's Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Guardians of the Galaxy director James Gunn now being set to reboot the universe starting with 2025's Superman Legacy. Although people are getting a little burnt out with superhero craze, it still makes sense for WB to try and use the DC roster to make a shared cinematic universe. Now, the issue is the buck doesn't stop here. Not only do we have the MCU, the failed DCEU, and now the gun-led universe on its way, we also have another installment of the Godzilla Monsterverse coming soon with Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire. See, back in 2014, a mere 2 years after Marvel's The Avengers, the bigwigs in suits decided it was time to launch their own monsterverse led by the main kaiju himself, Godzilla. The film was critically successful despite some misleading marketing, and did well enough at the box office. It was followed by a sequel just a couple of years later in Godzilla King of Monsters, which introduced several other kaiju, including fan favorite King Ghidorah. On top of that, the real sell of this universe came with 2017's Kong Skull Island. Now with 2 Godzilla installments under their belt, and a solo Kong film, add in a couple post-credit scenes linking the two together, and flash forward to 2021 where we received Godzilla vs. Kong. I really wish it stopped there. Remember how I mentioned earlier that even before the MCU there were several crossovers between the Universal monster characters like Frankenstein, Invisible Man, and Wolfman? Well, after the pile of money that Marvel was making, Universal took note and decided they too would like their own cinematic universe, cause why wouldn't they want a piece of that money pie? The universe unofficially started with Dracula Untold, but really was set to start with the Tom Cruise-led film The Mummy. But Universal got way ahead of themselves, announcing the launch of this universe with several A-list stars set to play pivotal roles, like Johnny Depp as the Invisible Man and Angelina Jolie as the Bride of Frankenstein. However, The Mummy was ultimately a complete and utter disaster, both critically and financially, and all plans for the Dark Universe were scrapped. Hey, at least they knew it wasn't going to work and stopped before they went too far. The same can't be said for the next and final cinematic universe I'd like to talk about, the one that really inspired this video. Yep, you guessed it, I'm obviously referring to the Sony Villainverse. I don't know if that's the official name, but let's refer to it as the Phonyverse. The Phonyverse began in 2018 with Venom starring Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock/Venom. Except Venom, a character synonymous with Spider-Man and operating usually as either a villain or at best an anti-hero depending on the comic, was now the main character in a major blockbuster, one that didn't contain Spider-Man. Still, the film was released, and despite not being critically well received, the film did very well at the box office, which gave Sony all the confidence they needed to launch a cinematic universe full of Spider-Man villains as the stars of their own films. All of them, not involving Spider-Man. Do you see the issue? We were then gifted Venom: Let There Be Carnage. The film did better in terms of reviews, but made nearly $300 million less than its predecessor. Then we got quite possibly the most memed movie of all time, Morbius, starring everyone's favorite Joker actor, Jared Leto. The film did very poorly, both box office-wise and critically. The memes and backlash were so severe that Sony decided to re-release the film after it had left theaters, thinking the memeability would get people to go and see it for the first time, or see it again. However, it completely backfired. It's been clear since the announcement of Morbius that Sony is leading into a big team-up movie with all of these, well, they're supposed to be villains, but let's call them anti-heroes, because that's how you make the big bucks. In 2024 alone, we're getting a third Venom film, as well as a solo Kraven the Hunter film. Similar to Morbius and Venom, it's been made clear that Kraven will not operate as a villain. In fact, the character, infamous for being the world's deadliest hunter, now does not hunt animals, and fights for animal rights, cause you can't have PETA on your back. And as we speak, the new Phonyverse film, Madame Web, starring Dakota Johnson and Sydney Sweeney, has hit theaters. And, well, as you can guess, it's getting bashed by pretty much everyone and anyone. Who could have guessed another Spider-Man villain movie that doesn't have Spider-Man and the lead character isn't a villain wouldn't work? I, for one, am shocked. Jokes aside, it's kind of frustrating that Sony actually may have had something with a villainverse. In a superhero-saturated market about iconic heroes being good people, a series of films about villains who do actual villain-esque things could have really set them apart from everyone else. A rated-R violent Venom film where Venom is actually a bad guy could have been really cool. Imagine if Sony had made several films focusing on villains and built into maybe bringing Garfield's Spider-Man back to face them, or maybe even introduce a live-action Miles. Either way, I'm getting away from the point. In the end, media and entertainment, and all art as a matter of fact, are usually products of trends and fads. When one thing works extremely well, it's natural to want to copy it, especially when your goal is to make that sweet, sweet cash. I'm not shocked that in the years following the huge success of the Avengers, that other studios have tried to replicate the same success, whether it's Giant Lizard fighting Giant Monkey, or Morbius meeting Michael Keaton's Vulture in a strange post-credit scene, crossovers and team-ups are all the rage. It's gotten to the point where even in the MCU, people don't really seem to care about the solo films anymore. They just want to know when the next Avengers movie is. It seems that it's not even solely sequels or reboots that are dominating Hollywood these days, but transparent attempts by studios to build cinematic universes even with properties that aren't exactly built for it. The title of this video is exaggerating a little bit, as I don't think all modern blockbusters are doomed or even that bad, but even with the success of Barbie, I have a feeling we'll start receiving more films about different childhood toys, as well as a part of me strongly suspecting that with films like Detective Pikachu, Super Mario Bros, and Sonic already being in the ethos, that we're not far off from getting a Super Smash Bros film. Either way, I think for better or worse, the Avengers a mere 12 years ago changed the landscape of blockbuster films forever, in the same way a little film called Star Wars did back in 1977. There's no really telling where modern blockbusters are going to go from here, but for the time being, it seems that a majority of what's going to dominate your trailers and what a lot of people are going to be seeing are movies that are in some way, shape, or form connected to another film. Well, that is really it for today, guys. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, make sure to click the like button, subscribe if you want to hear more from me, and make sure to click that little bell notification button so you get notified when I post new content. Also, check out my horror movie podcast, Scared Speechless. We talk about a different horror film every week, new episodes every Monday. Anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and we're even on YouTube. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video.